Terry Stouter. In your opinion, what is the difference in old school creators and new ones in writing their politics into stories? Example, the way Denny O'Neil did in the classic GLGA run as opposed to some of the stuff coming out in today's comics. Well, the thing that Denny's work on Green Lantern and Green Arrow has in common with the stuff coming out today is that it didn't sell either. Um, I remember going to I was just a, kid with a dream, going up to New York on a Wednesday afternoon because that's when DC would let freelancers in, or not freelancers, but wannabes. And we couldn't get to see editors. They would take us into a conference room just off of the lobby. So we were only like 20 feet from the elevators. That's as far as we got into DC Comics. And you'd show up, you'd wait around the waiting room, and then a couple of assistant editors would come out and take you into the conference room and tell you why you were never going to get a job at DC Comics. You know, basically, I was up there a couple of times and I was informed each time that the industry is dead. So this is the 70s, just prior to the implosion. So these guys knew things were bad. And the subject of one of them, subject at one of these meetings, these soul crushing events, a guy brought up, Green Lantern and Green Arrow because they asked us, what do you think is DC's #1 best-selling title? And this guy said, well, Green Lantern, Green Arrow, because it was so popular with fans. And the guy said, no, it's our lowest selling title. Scooter sells more than Green Lantern, Green Arrow. And he said, our #1 selling title at the moment is Jonah Hex, which blew my mind. I liked Jonah Hex, but I didn't realize it was their most popular title at the time. Taught me a lot, But Green Lantern, Green Arrow was a loss leader. That's why it didn't have a long run, even though fans liked it and they liked the combination of Denny and Neil Adams' artwork, and it all seemed very serious and all very relevant and topical and all that stuff. Comics were growing up dealing with these issues. Of course, they were growing up dealing with these issues with guys wearing spandex, guys with magic rings, another guy that fires a bow and arrow. They were going to deal with drug addiction and overpopulation and racial prejudice, and it was all going to be wonderful. But really, what it was DC trying to be relevant in their own market. When Marvel came along, they took over market share from DC. I mean, they kept creeping up the charts, and as Marvel sales increased, DC's decreased. So DC was at least bright enough to understand we are losing readers to Marvel. What have they got that we ain't got? And for the longest time, DC Comics thought that Marvel was a fad; it would blow over. They thought that Marvel Comics were inferior to DC Comics. They weren't as well crafted. They were not as intelligent. They weren't as consistent, and the kids would get tired of them, which obviously never happened. So so when Denny wanted to do relevant comics, they were all for it because they thought, well, maybe the kids will like this stuff, because at that point they were clueless. They had no idea what to do. They tried everything. They'd launched lots of new titles. They'd put go-go checks on the tops of the covers, because kids love checks. They offered to give away free bikes. I mean, DC did everything they could to stop the Marvel juggernaut, and just nothing worked. So they just threw caution to the wind and let Denny do some comics about topical stuff and political issues, and it was just an enormous failure. So that's what it has in common. I mean, that's why I never put politics into comics, because who wants to read my politics? You're not reading a comic book to read about politics. You're reading it to escape. And the thing is, if you wanted politics in your comics in the late 60s, early 70s, there were the undergrounds. So if you were a, dope smoking hippie, who wanted a comic book that you could relate to, there was plenty of stuff out there, and DC Comics was not the place you were going to go. Plus, when you write about politics and you write about topical stuff, generally the writer is trying to push an agenda. He's trying to get you to think the way he wants you to think. He's not dealing with the issue as a story. He's dealing with the issue as an issue, and he wants to make up your mind for you and only present one side of the argument. So yeah, that's it for me in politics and comics. They do not mix.